Hi everyone, Emily here, and today is day 21 of Bookmas. Holy cow, how have I managed to film 21 videos this month? I don't know, but here we are. Will I do Bookmas again next year? No. Unless if I do, I'll do shorts, maybe. Because this has been a lot. But I have another unboxing for you, and then of my advent calendar, and then I have my top 8 books of the year with 5 honorable mentions. And I'll explain to that in a minute. But let's. Oh, before I do my advent unboxing, so because I filmed some videos ahead of time, although this one I'm filming on December 21st. I filmed December 20th's video, or yesterday's video that I posted ahead of time. And I have tried the toffee pretzel or pretzel toffee coffee that was in that video. So good. Like, I need to get more of that coffee because that was amazing. Okay, so day 21. Here's something that I won't miss. Is how this box looks. It's so atrocious now. I think this is it. It's all like, it all fell. So here's day 21. Oh, ooh, this also sounds amazing. Peanut butter crunch. So this is notes of melt in your mouth peanut butter cookies. Like, I love peanut butter. I'm not, and I covered my mouth because, like, I'm not supposed, I have a whole long list of foods that I'm not supposed to eat because I get calcium oxalate kidney stones. Peanut butter is one of those things. Now, I can do soy butter. That's fine. Like, nuts are just a no-go. But my Reese's peanut butter cups, like, more so like the trees and the Easter eggs and the Halloween pumpkins, I'm not giving those up. Like, there's just so much that I have to give up. Those I'm not giving up. But I'm going to try. I'm looking forward to trying that. All right, now, my top 10 books, or 8 books with 5 honorable mention. So here's the deal. I had a pretty good reading year, but I don't, like, there's some that were clear, like, stand out, yes, this needs to go on the list. Like, my 1, 2, 3, 4, like, easily, the top 6 books were easy to pick. But I like 10 because it's a nice round number. And I was able to get 8, and then I was like, for the last 2, I was toying between 5 different books. And they all kind of were even leveled, and I just could not pick, this is the one. So that's why I'm doing 5 honorable mentions and then the top 8 books. So let's start with my honorable mentions. First up is Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting by Claire Pooley. This book, there are lots of trigger warnings for this book, so check trigger warnings because there is a lot of mental health, homophobic, racist things that happen to our point of view characters. But it's just such a beautiful story about people that are strangers on a train. They commute into work every day. And one of the commuters, he chokes on like a grape, I think, or he chokes on something, and they save his life. And they just come together into a found family situation. And it was just a heartwarming, funny, tragic, but beautiful story. This book was everything that I wanted Community Board, which I read earlier in the year. This was everything that I wanted Community Board to be, and Community Board wasn't. This was just such a beautiful book, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. The next book for an honorable mention is Lasagna Means I Love You by Kate O'Shaughnessy. And this is just a found family story about Mo, whose nan or grandmother has passed away. And she has an uncle who is in the armed forces. And he's like, I cannot, I can't take care of you for a variety of reasons. Um, and so she enters into the foster care system and she tries to find a family and um, help with her grief by collecting other people's family recipes and making them. And just it's all about that and the people that she meets along the way. And get the tissues handy because you will be crying. I don't know if you heard that, but that was my book falling off the sofa and then hitting my Stanley Cup and knocking that over. So if you heard a thud, that was that. The next book I was actually really pleasantly surprised about, Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Usually when a book is super hyped, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. And this is about video game designers in like the early years of video games and like the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, I believe. Really enjoyed it. Which is interesting because there's not really like one character that you're like, yes, they are a great character. They make all of the main characters make not great decisions. And there are times where you're like, I really don't like this character. But they're just compelling characters and fascinating. I thought it was also just beautifully written. There was a section that we switch POVs, and I understand why we did it, but I thought it was very jarring and took me out of the story and took me out of the flow of the story. And that's following an incident that, as a teacher, I had a hard time reading that section of the book simply because I've lived through situations that were unrealized, but were like, okay, we're going to be spoilery because I don't know how to talk about this spoilery. So I'm going to raise my hand. It's going to be spoilery. Fast forward if you need to. Okay, so the problem that I had is there was a mass shooting incident, and as a teacher who has lived through a lockdown, that was a legit lockdown, and fortunately the intruder was not armed, but it wasn't my first lockdown, and it wasn't the first time that I have been at work going, is today the day that I'm going to die as a teacher. And so for me, that part of the book was really hard to read, and I kind of would have liked to have known going into it. But, and then the point of view switch came at that time, which make it that part really doubly jarring. But yes, so spoilery talk done. But I did really enjoy this book, more so than I thought I would. The next book is another Book of the Month book, and that's Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. I'm sorry if I butchered that. And this really, it's less of, there are vampires in this story, but it's not about the vampires. It's actually it's a love story, and it's a historical story about the war between Mexico and America. And it's told from those on the Mexican side, which I thought was fascinating to read about. It's just lyrically and beautifully written. You can tell there's just a love for land, a love for people, a love for country in this story. And there's a second chance romance. And I normally don't like second chance romance, but I thought this was done beautifully. So I do want to read more by her. And then my last honorable mention, sorry that I go off screen. I have these books like on the floor next to me. My last honorable mention was The Ministry of Time by Kayleanne Bradley. Now I know some people are like, oh, The Ministry of Time, it won some Goodreads Choice Awards, and they don't like that. You're entitled to your opinion, okay? For me, this worked for me a lot. I really liked the the theme of otherness that is developed in this story, not just because someone has time traveled, but also because someone. So we have one of our main characters who is a time traveler and is kind of yanked out of his time, and so he experiences otherness. And then we have someone who is half British, half Cambodian, as and who experiences otherness because of that. And I thought that was just a fascinating read. So, and beautifully written, and this is a debut. I loved it. Would love to read more by her. All right. Now, those are all done with my honorable mentions. Now we're going to go into our my top 8 books. So the first book, and it is kind of from ascending order. So like number 8 was like of these 8 were the least standout. Not that this book is bad by any means, but there's some that were just a couple that were just clear blow away winners. Okay, so the first book is Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulson, and this is a middle grade graphic novel, and I just thought it was so utterly delightful. As Garlic, our vampire, she struggles with anxiety and fear and is tasked with leaving her garden to go check out this new neighbor who has moved in and to a castle, and they think that he is a vampire, and because she's Garlic, she will not get hurt by this new neighbor. And this is my first graphic novel that I've ever read, because I struggle with like, what do I attend to when I read a graphic novel? And so, but the pictures were beautiful. Like, I'll show you some of the pictures. Sorry, my finger there. I thought the pictures were beautiful, and she's just so delightful, and I need to read the sequel. Then the next book is Changes by Jim Butcher, which I don't know what number book this is in the Dresden Files. Let me quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is 12. This is book 12 in the Dresden Files series. I will say this. Do not read the back of this book before reading the book, because the back of the book will spoil the first sentence. And the first sentence is like a, what? Like, and unfortunately for me, I already knew what was coming, because a coworker has read Dresden Files, and she told me about like a character development for Harry Dresden, or a plot development for Harry Dresden. Why I enjoyed this so much is we get so much more development in Harry. I'm actually beginning to really like Molly and that relationship. Never thought I would say that, but here we are. And there are some things that happen at the end of this book that are just jaw-dropping, and I'm going, how is Harry going to live with the things that he has had to do in this book? I don't know. So I have a couple of short stories, maybe 4 short stories, because I skipped the 2 short stories before this book. So I have 2 short stories that I should have read before reading this book, and then 2 other short stories after this one before I read Ghost Story, which is the next book. But I do need to prioritize Dresden File 2025, fingers crossed, along with all the other books that I've talked about. But this is really good. Like, it was a wild ride. The next book, this kind of is a controversial opinion for some, but I binge read the ACOTAR series this spring. My favorite book of that series was A Court of Silver Flames, which is Nesta's book, Nesta and Cassian's book. And so many people hate Nesta, and so many people still hate her after reading this book. I personally love Nesta, and I love her more so after reading this book. And I didn't really care for her at the beginning of an ACOTAR, but learning more about her and their family in this book, it's like, oh, I get it. And really, a lot of the actions that she does now, is she justified? Like, is it okay, the actions that she does and how she treats people? Absolutely not. But it very much is a trauma response. And that was what made it fascinating for me. There was a line that I was just looking at my tabs this morning prepping for this, and it was like, she says, until she mastered herself enough not to hurt him, to stop feeling the old urge to strike and maim before she could be wounded. Like she tells the character, like, you need to leave and go up to the House of the Wind for the night, and don't speak to me until I come to talk to you, or until a week has passed. And she says this until she has mastered herself to not hurt him, to stop feeling the old urge to strike and maim before she could be wounded. And I've known people, I've been friends with people who that is exactly how they act and why they act. They've been hurt by other people, and so they will strike and hurt first, so that way they can be rejected right away, as opposed to getting close to that person and then being rejected later, and then being hurt because they've developed a relationship with that person. So they'd rather do stuff and strike out and lash out and sever that relationship before it has a chance to develop. There's a lot of people who have problems with the staircase stuff in this book. And I just have to say, you clearly then don't have, like as someone with bad knees and bad feet, sometimes going downstairs and like is harder than going upstairs. That sounds strange, but it's true. Like sometimes going downstairs is harder than going upstairs. Like when I leave my house in the wintertime, especially because I don't have a railing to hold on and it gets icy because I live in central Illinois and bad knees, going downstairs is a whole lot harder for me than going upstairs. Sometimes when my knee wants to act up, going down the flight of stairs in my apartment is harder than going upstairs. Like at work, I sometimes have to do stairs, and I'll take an elevator instead of doing down instead of going downstairs. And people are like, going downstairs is easier. Not always. All right, I need to be less verbose. All right, then the next book that I really loved, and as I'm picking out these books, I realized too, a lot of them feature trauma themes, which I've always said I don't want to read about trauma. Like that's why I wouldn't read contemporary fiction, because I felt so much of it was about dysfunctional people and addictions and things like that, and I was just like, I can't do that. As a teacher, reading needs to be a break. But I think the reason why I can handle it with these is that there's more to the story than just trauma. And I feel like in contemporary fiction, the trauma is the story. Whereas in these books, there's more to the story than just a trauma. But the next book is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is book 3. That's in a series that starts with Part of Your World, then Yours Truly in this book. Now, some people say they're kind of companion novels. It doesn't matter what order you read it. Personally, I feel that you should read them in order because there's some crossover characters from Part of Your World into this book. And some of the things that happen from Part of Your World impact and play into this book. And it's less impactful. I think it would be less impactful and meaningful. But this is the story of Emma and Justin. And they both are kind of like cursed, where they date someone. And then when they break up with that person then will find the one that they will like marry. And so they decide, let's date each other. They meet like in an online group and they decide, let's just date each other for the summer. And then we'll break up with each other and then we'll break the curse because it'll cancel out. So they do that and develop a relationship. And, there are some people who I've seen in some reviews or online that say, like, oh man, Emma was just really immature in some of the things that how she responds to things, and she just needs to communicate. It's like, no, she's actually disassociating from trauma, is how she's responding. And some of these things, like, it's a dissociation. And how is it functional? Of course not. But it's a dissociative state from trauma, and that's what she's doing. And I thought Jimenez did a wonderful job portraying that. Put that over there. All right, then the next book. We're now delving into my Chunky Beast books. That's Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Look, y'all, at how tabbed this is. And, like, it's kind of ridiculous, I know. But here's the thing. I read, like, I have to underline. Like, when I underline and write notes, it helps me remember things better. And I feel like Brandon Sanderson's world building is just so dense. So that's why it's heavily tabbed. But how to talk about this book without being terribly spoilery. There are things in here. We get Dalinar's backstory in this. And I will say this, like, in reading Dalinar's backstory, I actually kind of had a hard time liking Dalinar. And that in part is because I am the daughter of someone who had battled some of the beasts that Dalinar does in this book. So, and I feel like Sanderson is able to capture Dalinar's experience in battling those beasts very realistically. And so for me, that was sometimes hard to read. I loved Shallan's character development. Love Adolin more in this book. Like, I love him. Love him. And I didn't think that I would love him as much as I would, but I love him. And there's just some things that Dalinar says towards the end. Like, you shall not have my pain. Beautiful line. Ooh, I realize it's kind of spoilery. I'm so sorry. What more to say? I will say this. There was a part of this book that I was just like, ugh. Like, can we just get out of this place? Because this is awful. But fortunately, in talking with some people online, I've learned that I'm not the only one who feels that way. So it's a common theme. But that whole sequence is also really important. So I need to read more. I am Christmas break, Rhythm of War. Hopefully I can make a good dent in it. The next book I just loved, cried, was moved. That is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. How do I not have it tabbed? I thought I had some tabs about grief. But this is about, I can never remember character names, Clementine, who she moves into her aunt's apartment after her aunt dies. And her apartment is kind of like a time portal where there are times where you might come home and you'll be transported 7 years in the past. And as a result, she meets a man. I don't remember his name. Of course I don't. And on the back, it doesn't have the man's name. So she meets a man. And it's this is a romance, and it was just beautiful. And how she writes about grief, I thought was beautiful, and especially unexpected grief. And the author's note in the back, I think, is important to read, as it helps inform how this book was written. Okay, now we're in our last two. They're chonkers. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Oh my gosh. This was so good. Like if you're terrified to read this because you're not a horror fan, this is not horror. This is, I would say, more historical fiction, alternate history. It was cool. There were elements of like dread that I felt at the very beginning because our main character, he travels back in time with the whole purpose. Our main character is Jake, right? Yeah, Jake. He travels back in time with the whole purpose of stopping. Well, one of his big purposes is to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And where he first travels to is Derry, Maine, which, if you've read it, you know that it is set in Derry, Maine, and this is in like 1959 or 58, so it's like a year after some of the big events in it take place. So like the first 200 pages, I was like, just get out of Derry. Like the dread and the fear was visceral for me because I've read it, I've seen it with Tim Curry. I will not see the new one because clowns terrify me now. So, but this was just so good, and the ending was just so beautiful, and it wasn't the ending that I wanted, but it was the ending that was absolutely perfect and right for this book, and it was so good. And I'm so glad I read this book, and I have the stand on my 50 before 50. Okay, here we go. I don't know if I'll become a King fan, like for sure, because I don't want to read horror, but that and the stand I'll read. Okay. And then my last book. My last book I read early on in the year. The Count of Monte Cristo. Oh, look at how beautifully tabbed she is. I just love her. So, The Count of Monte Cristo. I'm so surprised by how much I loved this book because I was like, okay, it's French. I've tried. It's massive. I've tried reading Les Mis more than once, and I've DNF'd it more than once and said, I guess Les Mis is not the book for me. The musical is fantastic. The book, whoa, slog. But this, excuse me, that was hiccup. This was so good. Of course, we know it is the classic story of revenge after Edmond Dantes. He is wrongfully imprisoned for treason. This is set during the years, like directly after Napoleon is taken into exile on Ile de Sol, I believe was the island name. I don't think it was Elba yet. Maybe I'm wrong on the island name. But Napoleon is imprisoned, and so and then Dantes is charged with wanting to help bring Napoleon back into power. And so he's charged with treason, he's imprisoned, and 20 years later, we all know the story. He gets this treasure from the priest that he's also imprisoned with, and he then seeks revenge against the men who have imprisoned him. And this was so good. There's only like a couple of sequences that I was like, ugh, this is a little sloggy, but that wasn't very much. And this was I thought it was also very highly readable, which was impressive because sometimes there are classics that are just like, because it is a different language, like just, even if it were written, okay, let me try that again. So one, this is translated. So sometimes that can mean that the translated version then is clunky. It was not. It was highly readable. But also because it was written in a different time period and how they wrote and how they speak is different from modern speech and modern writing. Sometimes that can be hard to read. No, I thought this was very readable. So don't shy away from it. another thing that really helped me tremendously is I actually took in my journal at the time. I figured out, okay, I want to read this. I started this at like the last week of December. I was like, I'm going to finish this by the end of February. So if that's the case, then this is how many days I want to read this in. How many pages a day do I need to read? And I figured that out, and I actually wrote down in my reading journal, like, okay, by this end of this day, I have to read this many. I should need to be at the end on this page. Then I need to be on this page, and then on this page. And then I just crossed off as I hit those page markers. Did I fall behind at times? Yep, I did. Um, but I actually like the weekends were great to help me get caught up, and I actually did not feel pressure to because I was like, oh, I fell behind. Like I didn't feel any pressure, and so I would hit my page marks for the day, and then I would read other books to help break up. Like, oh my gosh, this is a chunky beast, and not feeling like I was making any progress on any kind of reading goals. So that's how I break up the big chunkers. But and it's like I normally also I don't like it like on my other books, cracking spines, but my classics, I'm okay with cracking spines. And in fact, like this is kind of hard to avoid because it's so big. But to me, it's also kind of like a sign of like, yes, this is loved. I can't wait to put this on my shelf. It's just wonderful. And also part of the reading experience was just talking about it sprints and be like, okay, I'm on this page. And then I was like, there's one set of sprints. I'm like, okay, I'm going to finish it. I need to finish it during these sprints to be able to celebrate. And then I had a Monte Cristo sandwich to celebrate, which I've never had before. And it was delightful. So enough rambling. Those are my top 8 with my 5 honorable mentions. Let me know if you've read any of those books and what your thoughts were and what are some of your favorite books that you've read this year. And as always, happy reading. Bye.